Undercover owner watches Black Waitress with a broken hand in his diner. He couldn't believe what happened next. The coffee pot shattered against the worn linoleum, ceramic fragments dancing across the floor like fallen stars. Steam rose from the dark puddles spreading beneath the counter as every conversation in Murphy's diner died mid-sentence. All eyes turned to the young Black Waitress clutching her bandaged right hand to her chest, fighting back tears that threatened to spill over her bottom lashes. And you still think you deserve this job? If you can't keep up, this isn't for you. The manager's voice cut through the sudden silence like a blade, sharp and unforgiving. His face was flushed red with irritation, his white shirt stained with coffee that had splashed during the collision. He stood over the waitress, arms crossed, making sure everyone in the packed diner could witness this moment of public humiliation. At the far end of the counter, a quiet man in a faded baseball cap slowly lowered his newspaper. The rustling of pages seemed thunderous in the hushed space. His weathered hands, calloused from years of honest work, gripped the edges of the paper as his eyes narrowed with an intensity that could have burned holes through steel. He wasn't just another customer grabbing a late dinner. He was David Murphy, the true owner of this diner, watching his late father's legacy unfold in ways that made his stomach turn. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you can stay close and never miss a new story. 3 weeks earlier, David had made the decision to return home after 5 years away. His father's funeral had been a blur of condolences and business discussions, but he'd left the day-to-day operations to his hired manager while he processed his grief on the road. Now, with dust from a dozen states still on his boots, he'd walked into his own establishment disguised as a weary traveler, wanting to see the truth of how things were being run when the owner wasn't watching. What he was witnessing tore at his heart like broken glass. The waitress, her name tag read Maya, bent carefully to collect the ceramic shards with her left hand. Her right arm remained pressed against her ribs, the white bandage stark against her dark skin. David noticed how she favored that side, the way her face tightened with each movement. This wasn't a fresh injury. This was someone working through pain because she had no other choice. Maya, honey, you don't have to. An elderly woman in a corner booth started to rise, concern written across her lined features. She made the mess, she cleans it up. The manager's voice carried the authority of someone drunk on small power. His name was Rick Paulson, and David remembered signing his hiring paperwork 2 years ago based on a recommendation from the previous manager. On paper, Rick had seemed competent. In person, he was proving to be something else entirely. Maya's jaw tightened, but she didn't respond. Instead, she methodically picked up each piece of broken ceramic, her movements precise despite the obvious discomfort. David watched the way she avoided eye contact with the other customers, the careful way she held her shoulders to minimize attention. This was a woman who had learned to make herself invisible while carrying the weight of the world. 15 minutes, Rick announced loud enough for the entire diner to hear. That's coming out of your pay for the broken pot and the disruption to service. A murmur of disapproval rippled through the patrons. David's hands clenched involuntarily. The coffee pot couldn't have cost more than $20, and he'd watched the entire incident unfold. Rick had been rushing past Maya while she was pouring coffee for the customer at table 6. The collision had been his fault entirely. But Maya simply nodded, swept the last fragments into her palm, and disposed of them without a word of protest. David forced himself to remain seated, to keep watching. He needed to understand the full scope of what was happening in his father's diner before he acted. His father, Michael Murphy, had built this place on principles of dignity and fairness. Every person who walks through that door deserves respect, he'd always said, whether they're wearing a 3-piece suit or haven't eaten in 3 days. As Maya returned to her duties, David observed the subtle choreography of her work. Despite her injury, she navigated the busy diner with practiced grace. She knew exactly how Mrs. Henderson liked her coffee, black with 2 sugars on the side. She remembered that Tom Bradley, the construction foreman at table 3, was lactose intolerant and always switched his order to almond milk. She moved with purpose, her good hand carrying plates and refilling drinks while her injured arm stayed carefully protected. Slow as molasses tonight, complained a woman in a red blazer, loud enough for Maya to hear as she passed. Some people just can't handle the pressure. Maya's step faltered for just a moment, but she continued walking without response. David noticed the way her breathing changed, becoming more controlled, more deliberate. She was fighting something back. It was then that David witnessed something that would stay with him for the rest of his life. At table 7 sat Harold Washington, an 83-year-old veteran whose hands shook from Parkinson's disease. David recognized him from the old days. Harold had been coming to Murphy's Diner since before David could tie his own shoes. The old man was fumbling with his wallet, bills scattered across the table as he tried to count out exact change for his meal. "I think I'm a little short," Harold said quietly, his voice carrying the embarrassment of a proud man forced to admit financial hardship. "Maybe I could just pay for the coffee in." Maya was beside him before he could finish the sentence. Without hesitation, she reached into her apron pocket and slipped a crumpled $5 bill under Harold's check. Her movements were so subtle that only someone watching carefully would have noticed. "Looks like you've got exact change, Mr. Harold," she said warmly. "And there's enough left for a slice of apple pie if you'd like. On the house for our favorite customer." Harold's eyes misted over. "Maya, sweetheart, you don't have to. My grandmother always said kindness comes back around," Maya replied softly. "Besides, Mrs. Chun made that pie fresh this morning. It'd be a shame to let it go to waste." David felt something crack open in his chest. That $5 had probably been Maya's tip from the previous table. In a job where every dollar mattered, especially for someone working with an injury that limited her effectiveness, she had given away her own earnings without a second thought. This was compassion in the face of cruelty. This was the kind of character his father had valued above all else. As the evening wore on, David continued to observe the dynamics of his own establishment with growing unease. Rick made a show of checking his watch whenever Maya took more than 30 seconds to complete a task. Other customers seemed to have divided into two camps: those who treated Maya with basic human decency, and those who viewed her injury as a personal inconvenience to their dining experience. The tension reached a breaking point when two businessmen in expensive suits claimed a booth near the window. David recognized the type immediately: loud, entitled, the kind of customers who viewed service staff as props in their own performance of success. They spoke in voices designed to carry, making sure everyone could hear their commentary about the stock market, their golf handicaps, their weekend plans in the Hamptons. Maya approached their table with practiced professionalism, her notepad ready in her good hand. "Good evening, gentlemen. What can I start you with tonight?" The first man, heavy-set with a gold watch that caught the diner's fluorescent lights, looked her up and down with undisguised disdain. Well, what happened to your hand there, sweetheart? Looks like you tangled with something that fought back." His companion, thinner but with the same predatory energy, chuckled. "Probably got it reaching into someone's purse. You know how these people are." The words hit the diner like a physical blow. Conversation stopped. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Even Rick, who had been counting the register behind the counter, looked up with surprise at the naked racism that had just been voiced in his establishment. Maya's face went completely still. David watched her jaw clench, watched her free hand tighten around the notepad until her knuckles went ashen. For a moment, he thought she might finally defend herself, might finally push back against the cruelty she'd been enduring all evening. Instead, she took a deep breath and spoke with quiet dignity. "I fell off my bike last week helping my son learn to ride. Now, what can I get for you tonight?" The lie was smooth, protective. David realized she was shielding not just herself, but the entire diner from the ugliness these men wanted to create. She was choosing de-escalation over justice, peace over pride. But her sacrifice only emboldened them. "A mother, huh?" The heavy man leaned back in his booth, grinning. "Let me guess, baby daddy's not in the picture? Probably in county lockup somewhere. Or dealing on some corner." His companion added with a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. This time Maya's composure cracked slightly. Her voice, when she spoke, carried the weight of exhaustion and pain that went far deeper than her physical injury. "I have a 7-year-old son waiting at home for me to bring back dinner. I cannot afford to lose this job. So please, just tell me what you'd like to order." The vulnerability in those words, the raw admission of desperation, should have been enough to shame any decent human being into silence. Instead, it seemed to encourage them. "What do you think, Paul? Should we make this interesting? Order something complicated. See if she can handle it with one good hand." David's newspaper began to tremble in his grip. His father's voice echoed in his memory. "A man's character isn't shown in how he treats his equals, son. It's shown in how he treats those who can't fight back. These men weren't just being cruel to Maya. They were desecrating everything his father had tried to build in this place. But before David could move, something else caught his attention. Maya had gone very still at the mention of her son. Her eyes had taken on a distant quality, and when she spoke again, her voice carried a different kind of strength. "His name is Marcus," she said quietly. "He's 7 years old, and he's the smartest, kindest boy you could ever meet. He gets that from his grandmother, my mother, Sarah Washington." The name hit David like a lightning bolt. Sarah Washington. He knew that name. Suddenly, he was 8 years old again, sitting in this very diner after school while his father worked the evening shift. There had been a waitress then, a young black woman with a smile that could light up the darkest day and work ethic that put grown men to shame. She'd been his father's right hand during the difficult early years, working double shifts when money was tight, covering for staff who called in sick, treating every customer like family. Sarah Washington. She'd been Maya's mother. David's mind raced through memories he hadn't accessed in decades. Sarah working through the blizzard of '92 when half the staff couldn't make it in. Sarah staying late to help his father reconcile the books when the accountant had made a mess of the paperwork. Sarah defending a homeless man who other customers had wanted kicked out, saying, "Mr. Murphy always said everyone deserves a hot meal and a warm place to sit." Sarah, who had worked at Murphy's Diner for 15 years before moving away when her husband got a job offer in Detroit. David had been away at college then, absorbed in his own life, but he remembered his father's genuine sadness when she left. "That woman helped build this place," Michael Murphy had said. "I don't know how we'll manage without her." Now her daughter was here, carrying on the same tradition of grace under pressure, of dignity in the face of cruelty. And David was watching it happen from the sidelines like a coward. The realization struck him with the force of a freight train. This wasn't just about witnessing injustice in his establishment. This was about family. This was about legacy. This was about the fundamental values that had made Murphy's Diner more than just a place to eat. It had been a cornerstone of the community, a place where everyone was welcome, everyone was treated with respect. Maya was part of that history. She was part of his father's legacy. And she was being humiliated and tormented while he sat silently in the shadows. The two businessmen had grown tired of waiting for their entertainment and had begun ordering the most complicated items on the menu, watching with anticipation as Maya struggled to write with her non-dominant hand. Each modification they requested, dressing on the side, eggs over easy but not runny, bacon crispy but not burnt, was designed to create opportunities for her to fail. David watched Rick observe the interaction from behind the counter. The manager could have intervened. He could have taken the order himself or assigned it to another server. Instead, he seemed content to let Maya struggle, perhaps even enjoying the show. That's when David's heart began to thunder with a mixture of fear and fury. Fear because he knew that revealing himself would change everything irrevocably. There would be no going back to quiet observation, no more anonymous assessment of his business. Once he spoke up, he would be accountable for every injustice he had witnessed and failed to stop. But fury because staying silent would betray everything his father had stood for. It would make him complicit in the cruelty. It would mean abandoning Maya, Sarah's daughter, to face this alone. The decision crystallized when one of the businessmen accidentally knocked over his water glass as Maya approached with their drinks. The water cascaded across the table and onto the floor, creating a slippery hazard that Maya, with her limited mobility, would have to navigate carefully. "Oops," the man said with mock concern. "Clumsy me. Better clean that up before someone gets hurt." Rick immediately appeared with a mop. "Maya, take care of this. And be quick about it. Table 12 is still waiting for their check." Maya nodded wordlessly and accepted the mop, beginning to clean the deliberate mess while balancing awkwardly to protect her injured hand. The businessmen watched with undisguised amusement, whispering comments to each other that made them laugh. Other customers in the diner had begun to notice the pattern. David saw Mrs. Henderson shake her head in disgust. Tom Bradley looked like he wanted to say something, but seemed unsure how to intervene. The whole room was filled with the kind of tension that comes when good people witness injustice, but don't know how to stop it. That's when David realized something profound. Everyone in this diner was waiting for someone else to act. They were waiting for someone with authority, someone with power, someone who could change the dynamic without facing retribution. They were waiting for him. David folded his newspaper with deliberate care, the sound sharp in the tense atmosphere. He placed it neatly beside his coffee cup, left a $10 bill on the counter for his meal, and stood slowly. The movement was subtle, but something about it drew attention. Perhaps it was the way he carried himself, the quiet confidence of a man who had finally made a decision. Perhaps it was the fact that he had been sitting silently for over an hour, observing everything without saying a word. As he walked toward Maya, who was still mopping up the artificial mess, the conversations in the diner began to die down. Even the businessmen paused their cruel entertainment to watch this unexpected development. David stopped directly behind Maya, close enough that she could sense his presence. When she looked up, he saw exhaustion in her eyes, but also a flicker of wariness. She didn't know what to expect from this stranger who had been watching her all evening. "Excuse me," David said, his voice carrying clearly through the now silent diner. "I couldn't help but notice what's been happening here tonight." Maya straightened carefully, still holding the mop. "I'm sorry, sir. If there's a problem with the service, I can get the manager for you." "Oh, there's definitely a problem," David replied, but his tone was gentle, not accusatory. "The problem is that someone has been working harder than anyone else in this place while dealing with an injury, showing kindness to customers who don't deserve it, and being treated like dirt for her trouble." The diner had gone completely quiet now. Even the kitchen sounds had stopped, as if the entire building was holding its breath. Rick appeared at David's elbow, his manager instincts finally kicking in. "Sir, if there's been any issue with your service tonight, I'd be happy to." "The service," David said, turning to face Rick directly, "has been exceptional. Maya here has been professional, courteous, and hardworking despite dealing with what is obviously a serious injury. The problem isn't with her performance." He turned back to Maya, whose eyes had widened with surprise. No one had defended her all evening. No one had acknowledged her efforts or her pain. "Your mother was Sarah Washington, wasn't she?" David asked quietly. Maya's sharp intake of breath was audible in the silence. You knew my mother?" "I knew her very well. She worked in this diner for 15 years. She helped build this place from a struggling restaurant into the heart of this community. She was one of the finest people my father ever had the privilege to know." Confusion flickered across Maya's face. "Your father?" David reached into his wallet and pulled out his driver's license, holding it so Maya could see the name clearly. "David Murphy. This is my father's diner. And as of 3 weeks ago, when he passed away, it's mine." The reaction was immediate and explosive. Rick's face went white as paper. The businessman's smug expressions melted into shock. Customers throughout the diner began murmuring to each other, processing this revelation and everything they had witnessed in its new context. But it was Maya's reaction that mattered most to David. She stared at the ID, then at his face, then back at the ID again. Her eyes filled with tears, not of sadness, but of something deeper and more complex. Recognition, relief, and perhaps, for the first time in a long time, hope. "Mr. Murphy," she whispered. I remember you. You used to come in after school. You'd sit at the counter and do your homework while your dad worked." David nodded, his own emotions threatening to overwhelm him. "And your mother used to bring me chocolate milk and tell me stories about her little girl at home who was going to grow up to change the world." The tears Maya had been fighting all evening finally spilled over, but they were different now. They weren't tears of humiliation or pain. They were tears of someone who had been invisible suddenly feeling seen. "She always said you and your father were good people," Maya said softly. "She said this place was special because it treated everyone like family." David felt the weight of that legacy settling on his shoulders. His father's vision for this diner, his mother's memory, the values that had been passed down through generations, all of it was embodied in this moment. He turned to address the room, his voice carrying the authority of ownership, but also the passion of someone defending what mattered most. "For those of you who don't know me, I'm David Murphy. My father built this diner on the principle that every person who walks through that door deserves dignity and respect. That means our customers, and it especially means our staff." His eyes found the businessmen, who were now studying their plates with intense interest. "Anyone who can't treat our employees with basic human decency is not welcome here. Period." Then he turned to Rick, whose face had cycled through several shades of pale. "As for management practices that involve humiliating injured employees, docking pay for accidents that weren't their fault, and allowing customers to abuse our staff. Those practices end now. Rick opened his mouth to respond, but David held up a hand to stop him. Maya, David said, turning back to the woman who had somehow become the center of everything. How long have you been working here? 6 months, sir. Since we moved back from Detroit. And how long have you been working with that injury? Maya hesitated, glancing nervously at Rick. 3 weeks. But I can still do my job, Mr. Murphy. I know I'm not as fast as I used to be, but you've been working with a broken hand for 3 weeks? David's voice carried a mixture of admiration and horror. Maya, why didn't you take time off to heal? The question seemed to break something open in her. Because I have a son, Mr. Murphy. Because rent is due on the 15th, and groceries don't buy themselves, and Marcus needs school supplies, and… She stopped, taking a shaky breath. Because I couldn't afford not to work. The honesty of that admission hung in the air like a challenge to everyone present. Here was a single mother, injured and in pain, working through her recovery because she had no safety net, no choice, no option but to keep going. And she had done it with grace. She had done it with kindness. She had even shared her meager tips with a customer who needed help. David looked around the diner, seeing his father's legacy through new eyes. This wasn't just about Maya, or even about Rick's poor management. This was about creating a workplace where people like Maya, hardworking, dedicated, struggling, could find not just employment, but dignity, support, community. Rick, David said, his decision crystallizing even as he spoke. You're fired. The words dropped into the silence like stones into still water, creating ripples of shock and satisfaction throughout the room. Rick's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, like a fish gasping for air. You can't just, Rick finally managed. I can, and I have. You've created a toxic environment that goes against everything this diner stands for. Clear out your locker and leave. Rick looked around the room desperately, as if seeking support from customers who had just witnessed his behavior all evening. Finding none, he stormed toward the back office, muttering under his breath about lawsuits and wrongful termination. David ignored him and turned back to Maya, who was staring at him with a mixture of gratitude and uncertainty. Maya, I have a proposition for you. She straightened, wincing slightly as the movement pulled at her injured hand. Yes, sir. David walked behind the counter and pulled out one of the management aprons, clean, pressed, with Murphy's Diner embroidered in gold thread. His father's apron, the one he had worn during the early days when he was still hands-on with daily operations. You've been carrying this place on your back for 6 months, working through an injury, showing the kind of character and dedication that built this diner's reputation. I think it's time you had a position that matches your commitment. He held out the apron to her. Maya Washington, would you accept the position of assistant manager at Murphy's Diner? The job comes with a salary increase, health insurance, and paid time off so you can properly heal from that hand injury. The diner erupted in spontaneous applause. Mrs. Henderson was dabbing at her eyes with her napkin. Tom Bradley was clapping so hard his coffee cup rattled. Even some of the younger customers who hadn't been paying attention earlier had joined in the celebration. Maya stared at the apron in David's hands, her eyes wide with disbelief. Mr. Murphy, I don't know what to say. Say yes, called out Harold Washington from table 7. You've earned it, honey. Maya took the apron with trembling fingers, holding it against her chest as if it were made of precious metal. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, Mr. Murphy. I accept. As she tied the apron around her waist, awkwardly, with her good hand, David felt something shift in the atmosphere of the diner. The tension that had been building all evening was replaced by something warmer, more hopeful. This was what his father had always envisioned, a place where hard work was rewarded, where character mattered more than circumstances, where everyone had the chance to rise. The businessmen who had started the evening's cruelty were now settling their check with unusual haste, clearly uncomfortable with their new understanding of Maya's position and their own behavior. As they prepared to leave, one of them approached David hesitantly. Look, about what happened earlier. He began. David's expression was polite but firm. What happened earlier was inexcusable. Maya showed you more grace than you deserved. I suggest you remember that the next time you're tempted to judge someone based on their circumstances or their appearance. The man nodded, his face flushed with embarrassment, and hurried toward the exit with his companion. As the evening wound down and the last customers settled their bills, David found himself working alongside Maya, learning the rhythms of the diner that had changed during his years away. She moved with increasing confidence as she wore the management apron, making decisions about table assignments and kitchen timing with the natural authority of someone who had been observing and learning for months. "Maya," David said during a quiet moment between customers, "tell me about your son." "Marcus, right?" Her face lit up with the kind of joy that only comes from talking about someone you love completely. "He's 7. Smart as a whip, just like my mother always said I was at that age. He wants to be an astronaut and a veterinarian and a chef when he grows up. All at once. He figures he can take care of animals on the space station and cook for the other astronauts in his spare time." David laughed, the sound genuine and warm. "Sounds like he has it all figured out. What about his father?" Maya's expression grew more guarded. "It's just me and Marcus. His father, well, let's just say he decided being a parent was too much responsibility. That's his loss and Marcus's gain," David said simply. "Growing up with a mother like you is better than having a dozen fathers who don't care." As they worked together, David learned more about Maya's story. She had finished high school despite getting pregnant her senior year. She had worked her way through community college while raising Marcus, earning an associate degree in business administration. When her ex-boyfriend's new girlfriend had made it clear that Maya and Marcus weren't welcome in Detroit anymore, she had packed their few belongings and moved back to the small town where her mother had once found dignity and respect. "I always planned to look for work somewhere else," Maya admitted as they wiped down tables together. "But when I walked into Murphy's diner and saw that it was still here, still the same warm place my mother had described, I knew I wanted Marcus to grow up seeing what she saw. A place where people take care of each other, even when the management wasn't living up to that standard." Maya paused in her cleaning, considering the question carefully. "I kept hoping things would get better, and I kept thinking about what my mother would do. She always said you can't control how other people treat you, but you can control how you treat other people." It was a philosophy that David recognized. His own father had lived by similar principles, believing that character was revealed not in moments of triumph, but in moments of trial. As the diner finally emptied and they began the closing routine, David made another decision that surprised even himself. "Maya, I have a confession to make. I've been away from this place for 5 years, dealing with my own grief and trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. I came back here tonight not just to check on the diner, but to decide whether to sell it or keep it running." Maya stopped counting the register and looked at him with concern. "And what have you decided?" David looked around the diner, at the worn but comfortable booths where families had shared countless meals, at the counter where lonely travelers had found conversation and community, at the walls covered with photos of local high school graduates and little league teams and anniversary celebrations. "I've decided that some legacies are too important to abandon. Murphy's Diner isn't just a business. It's a place where stories unfold, where people like your mother can build a life with dignity, where someone like you can find opportunity even in the darkest moments." He paused, meeting Maya's eyes directly. "I've also decided that I can't run this place alone. I need someone who understands what it means to this community, someone who knows how to treat people with respect and kindness even when they don't deserve it. Someone who has the kind of character my father would have admired." Maya's eyes widened as she began to understand what he was suggesting. "Maya Washington, how would you feel about becoming my full partner in Murphy's Diner? Not just assistant manager, but co-owner. 50-50 split, equal say in all decisions. Your name on the deed alongside mine." The offer hung in the air between them like a bridge across impossible distance. Maya stood frozen, the cash from the register still clutched in her good hand, as if she couldn't process what she had just heard. "Mr. Murphy, that's incredibly generous, but I don't have any money to invest. I can barely afford." "Your investment isn't money, Maya. Your investment is everything you've already given to this place. Your dedication, your character, your vision for what this diner can be. Those are worth more than any amount of cash." David pulled out a chair and gestured for Maya to sit down. "Let me tell you what I see when I look at you. I see a woman who worked through injury because she had a child depending on her. I see someone who shared her own tips with a customer who couldn't afford his meal. I see a person who faced cruelty and responded with grace, who treated difficult customers with patience and respect. He sat down across from her, his expression serious but warm. But most importantly, I see Sarah Washington's daughter. I see someone who understands that a diner isn't just about serving food. It's about serving the community. It's about creating a place where everyone feels welcome, where hard work is rewarded, where people can find dignity and opportunity. Maya's tears had returned, but these were different from all the tears she had shed that evening. These were tears of possibility, of hope, of a future she had never dared to imagine. My mother always said that sometimes God puts you exactly where you need to be, even when you can't see the plan, she said softly. I thought coming back here was about survival, about finding any job that would pay the bills. But maybe it was about something bigger. Maybe it was about coming home, David agreed. Your mother helped build this place once. Now you can help rebuild it. As they shook hands across the table, Maya's bandaged right hand carefully cradled by David's calloused ones, both of them understood that they were entering into more than a business partnership. They were committing to preserving and expanding a legacy of dignity, respect, and community that had been passed down through generations. The handshake was witnessed by the empty diner, by the photos on the walls of families and celebrations, and ordinary moments made special by the warmth of this place. It was witnessed by the memory of Michael Murphy, who had built something meaningful from nothing, and by the spirit of Sarah Washington, who had helped him do it with grace and determination. Over the following weeks, as Maya's hand healed and the partnership took shape, Murphy's Diner underwent a quiet transformation. Word spread through the community about what had happened that night, about the young mother who had been promoted from waitress to co-owner, about the businessman who had recognized character over credentials, about the restoration of values that many had thought were lost. Regular customers noticed the changes immediately. Service was faster and more attentive, not because the staff was being pushed harder, but because they were being treated better. Maya instituted a policy of paid sick leave and health insurance for all employees. She created a system for recognizing exceptional service that involved both financial rewards and public acknowledgement. But perhaps most importantly, she and David established the Sarah Washington Memorial Fund, a program that provided emergency financial assistance to employees facing unexpected hardships, ensuring that no one would have to choose between their health and their livelihood the way Maya had been forced to do. Marcus became a regular fixture at the diner after school, doing his homework at Table 7, Harold Washington's old spot, while his mother worked. The other customers took to checking his math and asking about his latest projects, creating the kind of extended community family that had always been Murphy's Diner's greatest strength. 6 months after that transformational evening, Maya stood behind the counter during the dinner rush, her hand fully healed, watching David train a new server with the same patience and respect she remembered her mother describing from the old days. The diner was busier than it had been in years, but it was also warmer, more welcoming, more true to the vision that had created it. As she watched a young father help his daughter read the children's menu while his wife rested her head on his shoulder, Maya thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. The pain, the struggle, the moments when she had wondered if she was strong enough to keep going. All of it had led to this. She thought about her mother, about the stories Sarah had told of dignity and hard work and the belief that everyone deserves a chance to rise. She thought about Marcus, sleeping peacefully upstairs in the small apartment above the diner that was now their home, dreaming of space stations and veterinary clinics and all the possibilities that stretched out before him. Most of all, she thought about the truth that had been revealed that night 6 months ago, that sometimes the people who seem invisible are actually the ones holding everything together. That character matters more than circumstances. That kindness is never wasted, even when it goes unnoticed. Maya Washington Murphy, she had taken the hyphenated name when they made the partnership official, had learned that the most powerful transformations often begin with the smallest acts of courage. A decision to keep working despite pain. A choice to show kindness to someone who couldn't pay. A willingness to stand up and be counted when everything would have been easier if she had remained invisible. As the evening rush continued around her, Maya touched the management pin on her apron, the same pin her mother had worn decades earlier during her years at Murphy's Diner. Some legacies, she realized, aren't inherited. They're earned. And sometimes, if you're very lucky and very determined, you get the chance to earn them twice. The diner hummed with conversation and laughter, with the clatter of dishes and the sizzle of food on the grill, with all the ordinary sounds of a community gathering place where everyone was welcome, everyone mattered, and everyone had the chance to be seen for who they truly were. And in the back office, framed and hanging on the wall beside the safe, was a photo from that transformational night 6 months earlier. Maya in her new management apron, standing beside David Murphy, both of them smiling with the quiet satisfaction of people who had chosen to do the right thing even when no one was watching. Except, of course, everyone had been watching. They always are. And sometimes, if we're very fortunate, those moments of character and courage create ripples that spread far beyond what we ever imagined possible. The story of that night had become legend in the small town, retold at kitchen tables and coffee shops, shared with newcomers as an example of what their community valued. Children heard it from their parents. Teenagers working their first jobs learned about it from older employees. Business owners referenced it when making decisions about how to treat their staff. But the real legacy wasn't in the retelling, it was in the living. It was in the way Marcus grew up understanding that dignity and respect weren't privileges to be earned, but rights to be protected. It was in the dozens of employees who passed through Murphy's Diner over the years, learning that workplaces could be built on principles of fairness and compassion. It was in the customers who witnessed that transformation and carried the lesson into their own lives, their own businesses, their own moments of choice between cruelty and kindness. Most importantly, it was in the understanding that sometimes the most profound changes begin not with grand gestures or public announcements, but with quiet acts of courage performed by people who believe, despite all evidence to the contrary, that tomorrow can be better than today. Maya had learned that being seen, truly seen, wasn't about being noticed or acknowledged. It was about being valued for who you are, not despite your struggles, but because of how you've chosen to face them. And David had learned that coming home isn't about returning to the place you left, but about choosing to become the person that place always believed you could be. Together, they had created something that honored the past while building toward the future. A place where broken hands could heal, where invisible people could be seen, and where the simple act of treating each other with dignity could transform not just individuals, but entire communities. The coffee pot that had shattered that night had been replaced long ago. But the moment it created, the moment when compassion met cruelty and chose to stand tall, that moment lived on in every cup poured, every meal served, every hand extended in welcome at Murphy's Diner. Some stories end. This one simply continued, one act of kindness at a time. If you made it to the end, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. It truly means the world to us. See you in the next one.